سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to ALI 495, part 2 of our conversation. Unfortunately, I still haven't been able to fix my camera issue, and so we will be conducting this session via audio only. I hope inshallah you will be okay with that. And I hope inshallah, like last week, you will engage in the conversation and the discussions that we are having. I will want to review the material from last week before we continue with any new material, but I'm going to wait for a couple of minutes because it is 5:30 on the dot on Pacific time, and will allow attendees to join. In the meantime, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask or any clarifications from last week, please feel free to do that at this time. And inshallah, if not, then we'll get started in a couple of minutes. I also hope that you're able to hear me clearly. If you can respond and confirm that you are able to hear me, then I know, alhamdulillah. Thank you, brother Ali Raza, for that conference. At any time during the session today, if you find my voice is not loud enough or it is breaking, do let me know right away so I can try to fix the issue. Also want to remind you that like last week, I'll be taking a 4 to 5 minute break during the session at around 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, just to offer the Maghrib prayer and hopefully give you something to discuss during that time. And then I'll come back and continue with the session with you. Okay, so we will get started with the session. And before we get started, I just want to review the material from last week. And I want you to help me with the review of the material. If you can just kindly share with me a message that stood out for you from last week's session, something new that you learned or something unexpected that you learned or something that changed the way you look at things. Thank you, Ali Reza. The concept of modern and postmodern society was something new that we explored. And I think it's very important for us to understand it and to understand its root and to understand how it's propagated in contemporary society because it does seem to drive a lot of our thinking, a lot of the changes that we observe not only in our society, but we observe in our children. And there's no doubt that these of thought, which are very foundational thought, they do seem to impact not only our thought, but our understanding of religion. So definitely it's an important concept for us to learn. And not to be ignorant of the views and the effect of these views. It does affect sometimes consciously and sometimes subconsciously It's definitely the underpinning behavior that we observe in our society. And sometimes it happens that we're able to protect ourselves from the behavior that we see in our society, but not from the ideology that supports that behavior. And that's something we need to be more careful of. And yes, it's important to consider the history of our environment and analyze its effects. Things do not appear in a vacuum, they always appear in a particular context. Modernity came about because of the way Western society was structured prior to the 14th, 15th, 16th century, right? And then post-modernity came about because of the failings of modernity. So these are all reasons what was there before. And sometimes we don't appreciate that. And whatever we see in Western society, we want to superimpose it or impose it onto Eastern society, not realizing that, there were historic reasons for why those concepts became important in the West. For example, there are historic reasons for why feminism became so important in the West. The rights of women were completely women were not given some of their rights that they should have. And then modernity came and reacted to that, and reacted to that sometimes in a very strong manner. One of the things that you will notice in societies is that when you have one extreme view, then the reaction to it sometimes is an extreme view. And therefore, we see that in modernity and then even in post-modernity. So, it doesn't make sense then for us to take an extreme view and to impose it on other societies. So definitely important to understand the history of our environment. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. So just to give you an outline, we'll be going back and forth on the slides today. I will quickly do a review of last week's material. And then if you remember, we had broken down our conversations into two parts. Living in the West, I say that one is important for us to develop and nurture our faith. And secondly, it's important for us to develop and nurture our communities. Last week was dedicated to faith, and this week is dedicated to community. We have some loose ends to tie up when it comes to faith. So I will be going back on the slides, and then we will start off with community. And I want to look at the impact of modernity on communal life and how that has changed communal life, not only in the West, but also very much in the East as well. And what are the reasons for why it has changed? I also want to look at what is a community. I think that the impact of modernity is so strong. Not only has it changed communal life, it has also changed our perceptions of communal life. And we live in a new type of environment with a new definition of community. And we assume that it has always been like that. This is community life. On Thursday nights we go to mosque, or on Friday we go to mosques, and that's community. And we will see that the Islamic definition of community is very, very different from our contemporary understanding of community. And so, what is the community from Islamic tradition? And then we'll look at the practicality of that or the applications of that in today's society. And then we only look at a few applications because time will not allow us to look at the whole breadth of how our communities should be structured very, very differently from the way they are structured right now. But I do want to go back to faith, but let's just quickly first do a review. So last week I spoke to you about traditional way of life versus modern way of life versus postmodern way of life. And I know that the word modernity has a certain positivity to it. And so we always associate positiveness to that which is modern and negativeness to that which is traditional. I think we need to lose those judgments. And let us just understand first what is the traditional approach, and then what characterizes the modern approach. And then what characterizes the postmodern approach? It's not my expectation that you will understand the depth of these differences. I do hope that I would have introduced you to these differences that you can go and inshallah explore on your own and of the changes in society affected thinking. um, the table that you see in front of you has been taken from the work of a good friend, colleague of Sheikh Rizwan Rashid. So give him credit for uh, Prophet, wonderful course on post-society and technology, and he really well. And if you ever have an opportunity to do that course with him, if he is in the Toronto area and you're in the Toronto area, I would highly recommend you to do that course. But very, very quickly, you know, traditionally there was absolute realism, meaning there's a metaphysical world. Can you hear me breaking up? Um, all right. Is my voice okay right now? Hear me better? Or voice still breaking up? Talking. Huh. Um, okay. Yes, I'm coming to that, inshallah. I'll explain that again. Um, let me just try out a few things and see if the uh, connection is a little better. Okay. Okay, I'm going to continue talking, and I hope that you'll be able to hear me okay. If you're not able to hear me or it is breaking up, do let me know right away, and I will try to then call in, and hopefully it's better when I call in. Okay. Um, all right. So the traditional understanding was absolute realism. Absolute realism implies that there is a real world out there, and that real world is made up of the physical world and the metaphysical world, and that there are also grades in the metaphysical world as well. So the real world is something that we can see with our eyes, but also something that we can experience with our hearts. It's not limited to what we see with our eyes. It also includes things that we're not able to see with our eyes or things which we're not able to empirically observe, right? So the dunya and the akhirah, if we want to simplify it, for example, or this world and the higher worlds, okay? Then came modern society, and it reduced it to scientific realism. Whatever is observable, whatever is empirically visible, that is real. And whatever is not observable or visible to the physical senses, that is not real. Okay. But they say that there is a reality, it's just limited to the physical reality. And then came postmodernity and said, well, there is no reality out there, neither a physical reality nor a metaphysical reality out there. Reality is what you consider to be real in your mind. Now, in the traditional approach, what informed our worldview was religion, and whether it was Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism, but religion was the main force that informed our view of the world. Come modernity, and now it is science and humanism that informs our view of the world and informs what we ought to do. And then you come to post-modernity, and it's very much subjectivism, right? So, religion, for example, contained revelation, right? Scripture and reason. Modern times, revelation went away and only reason was accepted. But there was reason. Reasoning was used to understand the world. Come to post-modernity, revelation is cast aside, reason is also cast aside, right? And therefore, you will notice that when we live in postmodern times, we're told that you live in a post-truth era, right? Where reasoning is not that important. The truth is defined as very subjective, and it's defined by your own emotions, your own experiences, your own understanding, but there's no need to seek recourse in reason or in revelation. As a result of that, in traditional society, the authority was with religious leaders. They were the explainers of religion, they were the explainers of revelation and reason. In modern society, the authority is with the experts in rationality, like the philosophers, and experts in empiricism, like the scientists. So you'll notice in the 70s and the 80s, even when it comes to the Quran, our questions were, what does science say about the Quran? Does science, for example, what do scientists say? If you remember, there was a big thing about scientists who, for example, either embraced Islam or they promoted a theory that supports Islam. Even as a Muslim community, we looked up to scientists and their support of Islam or Islamic ideas because we saw scientists as the authority, right? Um, Even miracles, are they scientifically explainable? What does Stephen Hawking, for example, say about God? They had become the authority. Postmodern society, well, if there is no truth and there is no higher truth, then there is no authority when it comes to the truth. Therefore, it is very anti-authority, and therefore I am the authority. So I do me. I think for myself. I don't accept anybody else's authority, right? I do what I think is right. I have to be authentic to myself. I don't allow anybody else to exercise authority over me, or I don't look up to them for what is right or wrong. I must be authentic to myself. These terms like authenticity that come up. Now, sometimes you should ask yourself, how come 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it wasn't a thing? 50 years ago, it wouldn't have made sense. How come today it's such an in thing? What has significantly changed in our thinking that allows for this type of thought? Well, postmodern thought. Traditional society, there's a purpose. The purpose was to know where we come from and where we are going because there's a higher reality, there's a higher truth. We come from a higher reality. We are here for a purpose, and we have to return. And what is our purpose over here? Well, in the modern society, the metaphysical world is gone. It's only the physical world, but we still maintain purpose. We say our purpose is to know the physical world, to know the society, to understand the physical world and to understand the society, and then to utilize it to improve our lives, for example, on earth. Post-modernity, when there is no truth, there is no purpose, so there is no set purpose in life, and the differences go on and on, stemming from that one singular distinction that up until modern times there was some type of truth. Come postmodern times, even the whole notion that there is actually an objective truth, and our objective is to try and understand it. Well, that idea is gone, and that's what it means when they say that we live in a post-truth society. It's not just something that, for example, appears in the news, where the news, or let's say certain politicians, no longer care about what is the truth, what is the standard for understanding the truth, who are the authorities who can help us to understand the truth. No, it's not just something in the news, it's part of popular culture, part of popular society. The truth is what is the truth to a person. It's very subjective, you know. Um, Thank you. Postmodern ideology is open and subjective. How do you explain law and order, taxes, beliefs, and so on and so forth? Uh, right? So, you know that uh, on one hand, we do need to be able to structure our lives. And, I'm not trying to say that right now all of our society is postmodern in its thinking. Some are modern, some are postmodern. And society right now is a mix of both modernity and postmodern thought at the moment. Our structure, our political structure is very much informed by our history. So we have carried those structures over. But you will notice that there are changes appearing in those structures as well. For example, the law is becoming more and more vague. Those things which were initially considered to be prohibited, society prohibited them. More and more now they are considered to be acceptable. So in the past, it was very clear that abortion, especially late-term abortion, is something that's wrong. Now the idea is let a woman do what she wants to do with her body. The same goes, for example, with marijuana. In the past, it was very much considered, and I don't want to get into the debate on whether it's harmful or not harmful. To what extent is it harmful? But it was clearly understood that this is harmful. You shouldn't do it. Now it's like, let people do what they think is in their best interest. It's not in the best interest of, for example, government to be able to dictate to people what they should do. So the laws are also, if you notice, becoming more and more open, uh, not as restrictive as they used to be. And that's one of the effects of postmodern thinking. Secondly, there are some conclusions derived that a group of people are controlling masses with creating a life of debts, controlling interest rates, etc. What's the view in that? So I think that pertains more so to capitalism. I don't want to get into that discussion at the moment, but at the end, Brother Mazahir, if we come to that, inshallah, if we have some time, I don't mind looking into that. Okay, so moving on very quickly now. Um, the basic messages from last week then was one, we should seek to understand the ideologies and trends of our societies. And many of you picked that up from last week because these ideologies and trends cause the behavior of our societies. The reason I emphasize that is that, ideologies and trends are not visible to the eye and therefore very easy to ignore. Behavior is visible to the eye and therefore very easy for us to get shocked by behavior. But we need to now look more towards these ideologies and trends that prop up a particular behavior. We should also seek to understand the lifestyle choices that lead to these trends and ideologies. So, for example, one of the things that comes out of modernity is individualism and sometimes even extreme individualism. But individualism is not just a theory, it is something that society lives like that in modern times. We live a very individualistic life. The question we ought to ask ourselves is, okay, I recognize that one of the ideological differences between modern societies and traditional societies is that modern societies are very individualistic, traditional societies are very collective. Okay? In traditional society, we had a sense of duty towards each other, to help each other, to protect each other. The good of the collective was more important than the individual. Modern society, that's very, very different. The rights of the individual become a lot more important. Now, question, how is individualism actually created in society? Surely it's not just through theoretical conversations, it's not just through university books and university lectures. Well, individualism is created by the lifestyle choices that we make and the lifestyle choices that we make for our children. And then the question is, well, what are those lifestyle choices? And just to give you very, very simple ideas, in the past, for example, if a person had three children, they probably all sleep in the same room. Let's say if there were three boys, they'd share the room, they'd share the resources in the room. You know, their rooms were not individualized to them. And they never grew up with this idea that I deserve to have my own room that's made just for me. Well, today that's very, very different. It's very much, for example, my room, my space. I deserve to have my own. This is my space. Nobody else comes into my space. Those small things is what actually leads to this particular view of the world. One of the questions sometimes many people ask is, how come we don't know the birth dates of our imams? There's a difference of opinion when it comes to their birthdays. And the very simple answer to that is, well, in the past, nobody really cared about birthdays. It's very rare that people cared about birthdays. They didn't even know sometimes which year they were born in, let alone which month or which date. Today, it's very, very different. We raise our children from a very young age. Know your birthday. You're very special on that day. You are, this or that on that particular day. Um, and these are the small changes in lifestyle that actually prop up this idea of individualism, right? um, Three, we should seek to accept what is good and reject what is bad. So I'm not trying to say that everything of modernity and post-modernity is bad and we need to shun all of it. No, we need to understand it, and what is good we accept, and what is bad we reject. But we can only do that if we first understand, well, what is modernity and what is post-modernity. For example, the empirical method is actually very, very good as long as we know that it falls in the realm of the physical world and the realm of science. The empirical method has been able to tell us more about this universe than any other method, more about, sorry, the physical world than any other method. That's good. But if we're trying to, apply the empirical method to, not just the physical world, but the metaphysical world as well, well, that's where it doesn't work. So, we should seek to accept what is good and reject what is bad. Next point is you should know that the good can be found in Islamic tradition. So we don't need the modern world or the Western world, the postmodern world to tell us what is good. We don't need to mimic them. We don't need to follow them. We should have this understanding that, the goodness that is found over there, that is part of the human experience that human beings have come up with through their thought, is already present within Islam. And we need to go back to our own traditions to find that within our own traditions. And then finally, we should seek to understand the impact of media, friends, and school on our thinking and our view of the world. I wanted to speak a little more about that, but I think I'm going to have to pass on that. Now, um, I'm going to take a break right now for Salat for about 3 to 4 minutes, but I will leave you with a question. And just the last question before we move on to community. So we understand that the modern world and the postmodern world, or thought, sorry, does impact our thinking. And owing to that, it also impacts our faith. It also impacts our values. So in modern society, and when we are exposed to postmodern thought, how can we maintain our faith and maintain our values um, from this type of thinking? That's the question that I'm here. How do we maintain our Okay, I got disconnected. I'm not sure why I got disconnected, but um, are you able to hear me right now? Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to leave you for about 3, 4 minutes and I'll be back, inshallah. But I look forward to hearing your responses. The question was, how do we maintain our faith and values in a modern or postmodern world? Now we recognize what the challenges are. How do we structure our lives? That's the question, to be able to overcome these challenges. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. صلى الله عليه وسلم. سبحان الله أكبر استغفر الله. الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. سبحان الله أكبر استغفر الله. سبحان الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. استغفر الله. اللهم صل على بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تقبل الله أعمالكم. Brother Mazahi responded by saying parents need to educate themselves, parents need to lead by example, a little bit of sacrifice and extra effort, example private or Islamic school, which they would have to pay, unlike public school. So I think the need to educate ourselves and have a formal understanding of religion, a rational understanding of religion, a structured understanding of religion becomes more and more important in the West and in modern societies. We can no longer afford to have a very basic understanding of religion, not understand the reasoning behind it, and just follow the rituals of the religion. It may be that that is sufficient for us, but then is that going to be sufficient for our children? And is that going to be sufficient to explain to them the Islamic view of the world? Perhaps not. We can make lifestyle choices that lead to Islam and Islamic practices and godly practices rather than modern and postmodern ideas and practices, right? So, of course, what's also important is that not only are we going through an academic and theoretical struggle to understand the challenges, but we're also making lifestyle changes as well. The whole idea of being of service, and looking at what your duty and your responsibility is, and then raising your children like that as well, that they don't grow up with a sense of entitlement, but they grow up with a sense of hard work, effort, understanding that every think that they acquire is a blessing of God that they are not entitled to, and grow up with this idea of being of service to the religion and to a higher truth. That requires a very important lifestyle change within us. So that's very important. And we can choose to make Islamic celebrations greater than other celebrations. But I agree with that, but it shouldn't be just at a superficial level, where these are our celebrations, those are their celebrations. How can we make our celebrations like their celebrations? They have, for example, Halloween, we have Eid. No, the two are very, very different from each other. So one thing you will notice in today's society is that pointless celebrations become more and more important. Halloween, for example, or even Christmas, the way it is celebrated. If you were to ask any Canadian or American, why do you celebrate Christmas? And there's no real reason to it, right? It's not because of some historical reality or a higher truth. Well, there is no higher truth in today's society. We celebrate for the purpose of feeling good, of feeling happy, for the purpose of celebrating, of enjoying life. There is no deeper truth to it. In Islam, celebrations are very, very different. They come after a recognition of a higher truth. And in our celebrations, we should try to inculcate that into it. I mean, that's how traditional society was propped up, that celebrations came after you worked hard in the month of Ramadan, after you work hard in the month of Dhul Hijjah, come the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, you celebrate, or you recognize a great blessing came down from God to us in the form of the Holy Prophet or Imam Ali, and that's why you are celebrating. Now, that's very, very different from, let us say, celebrating something without a purpose, really, like Halloween or whatever else it is. Make our own beliefs firm. We understand the dangers of the society, and then we make sure that we won't be affected by them. Yes, that is correct. We must create spaces where our Islamic identity can be validated. On the lower level, this means having groups of Muslim friends attending Islamic events or events run by Muslims and exposing ourselves to Islamic media. On a larger level, this means attending, supporting Islamic schools, institutions, and organizations in creating societies and cultures where Islam is allowed to be the guiding framework. Our values and ideas can be reinforced and seen as valid. Thank you for sharing that. That will actually bring us into today's conversation about community and what does an Islamic community look like, and why I think we don't have communities at all in modern societies, and in particular in Western societies, and that we have completely lost a sense of what a community is supposed to be. But thank you for sharing that. Okay, so if I can just move back a few slides just to show them to you, and then we will move into our conversation on community. Strategies for developing faith, as many of you mentioned. Number one, developing a rational understanding of our faith, and having continuing education even after madrasa, the way you are doing right now, engaging in courses with Academy for Learning Islam and other academies as well, and developing, it doesn't have to be a very philosophical and deep understanding of Islam, but an intellectually satisfying understanding of Islam, and an understanding that comes by acquiring knowledge not just from watching YouTube clips, or watching these 7 8 minute videos that have become very, very popular nowadays, which try to simplify Islam into a very basic message. And there is a place for it, and there is a time for it, but actually getting into an understanding of the structure of Islam directly from a scholar. Two, as Brother Ali Raza and others mentioned, selective and smart about media consumption, right? What books are we reading? What articles, what shows, what movies, what posts are we reading? And being critical of them. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't read alternate views. What I do say to our young brothers and sisters when I speak to them is that if you are going to read something that has an alternate view, then at the same time work along with a scholar or work along with an expert to understand what is the critique of that alternate view. I recently had a young man who spent a lot of time watching videos on YouTube made by um, right-wing extremists. And he was a person who had strong iman, and one day he came to me and said, "Well, I have many doubts about the Holy Prophet." And his problem was not that he was watching the videos by these right-wing extremists, is that when he was consuming that, he wasn't asking or listening to the alternate arguments to that. So that's very, very important if we're going to do that, and then critically evaluate trends, policies, agendas, and statements. One last thing before we move on is that there is a difference between ilm and iman. Ilm is knowledge, iman is faith. Okay? Ilm pertains to our intellect, iman pertains to our hearts. Ilm is acquired through reading and listening and thinking and debating and going for courses. Iman is not acquired in the same way. There's a beautiful hadith by the sixth Imam. He says to Unwan al-Basri, ليس العلم بكثرة التعلم. The ilm, meaning the iman actually that you're looking for, is not acquired from a lot of learning. Rather, it is a light that is cast in the heart of whomever Allah wills. Therefore, seek the reality of ilm through servitude, through ubudiyah. And the important point I want to make is that, when you learn Islam, you acquire ilm. When you live Islam, you acquire iman. All right? Not only do we have to learn Islam, but if we want certainty and we want to develop our faith, we will have to live Islam. Our lifestyle choices actually do more for our iman than just learning does. And I've got some notes over here, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them. Okay. The next area that I want to talk about in the time that we have is community. So let me ask you first, how do you define community? And what does community mean to you? And what do you mean when you say my community? What is that thing that is your community? So, a very simple question. How do you define community? What is your understanding of community? Um, when you say my community, what does that mean? Ascent, the center that you attend, that's your community. The background that you come from, that is your community. A culture of people with cohesive ideas and values who share valuable relationships that take them closer to God. Uh, so, yes, Brother Ali Raza, there are different levels of community. When I talk about it in the context of the Muslim community or the Shia community, I generally like to use the term community. When I talk about it in terms of I use the word society. So I'm asking right now about our communities, the people that we meet at our centers, the centers that we go to, that circle. We, how do you say that's, what is it that's my community? What is a strong community? What is a weak community? Hmm. Okay, a strong community is one where brotherhood and sisterhood. It depends. Empty center is equal to a weak community. Members of our community become family influence and positive change, right? So we have different ideas of the community and what makes for a strong community. But generally, the idea is it's a group of people. You meet together at certain places, like a center. They help you, they support you, and it's important to have a common vision and a common goal for us to call that a community. Okay, so we'll keep that kind of a definition in mind, and let's move forward with it. The first thing that we notice in Islam is that community is very, very important. In Islam, we do not develop our faith by ourselves. We always develop our faith within the community, right? Within a group of people. We're encouraged to do that. Surah Al-Asr, by the time surely man or mankind is at a loss, except those who believe and they have faith. Well, you say, I believe, sorry, those who have faith and they perform good deeds. You say, okay, I have faith, I perform good deeds. The Quran says, no, no, that's not enough. وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. And they are in a community where they encourage each other towards the truth and they encourage each other to be patient. Okay, so in Islam, we always develop ourselves with the community. And Um, we have a hadith over here from the first Imam that appears in the Nahj al-Balagha, where the Imam says, "Alzimu sawad al-a'zam." I've put a question mark there. I was looking for a good word for the translation, and I didn't manage to replace that question mark. But the black masses, meaning, where people are, for example, congregating, a lot of people are congregating. That's what it means. And here it means that, stay in the masajid of the Muslimin, go and congregate with them, do not separate from them. فَإِنَّ يَدَ اللَّهِ مَعَ الْجَمَاعَةِ. Because surely the hand of God is with the community. Now, here, this particular statement needs to be interpreted properly. It doesn't mean that what the majority do is correct. That would be against the teachings of the Quran. The Quran says most of the time the majority will lead you down the wrong path. No, here it means that God helps people who are united and people who are together. For surely, فَإِنَّ الشَّاذَّ مِنَ النَّاسِ لِلشَّيْطَانِ. For surely the person who separates himself from the community becomes the target of shaitan. كَمَا أَنَّ الشَّاذَّ مِنَ الْغَنَمِ لِلذِّئْبِ. The same way when one sheep separates itself from the flock, it becomes a target of the wolf, right? So as long as you are in a good Islamic community, the influence of the community, the thoughts of the community play a far greater impact upon you than the thoughts of shaitan can play upon you. So very important for us to have strong communities, especially when we're living as a minority within a minority, in Canada and in America. In Canada, the Canadian population is about 35, 36 million, of which about 1.2 of them, of which I would assume anywhere between 2 to 300,000 would be Shia. So we're generally a minority within a minority. How do we survive? Well, it's not our first experience living as a minority. If we go back into history, the Shia community always lived as a minority. So look at what the Imam said. Now that you have to live as a minority, here's a strategy for you. Ittaqullah, be God wary. وَكُونُوا إِخْوَةً بَرَرَةً. And be good brothers to each other. مُتَحَابِّينَ فِي اللَّهِ. Loving each other in the way of Allah. مُتَوَاصِلِينَ. Be connected to each other. مُتَرَاحِمٍ. Be compassionate towards each other at this time, because you're both going through some profound struggles. And if each of you sometimes make a mistake here and there, show compassion, show rahmah to each other. وتزاوروا, visit each other, وتلاقوا, meet each other, وتذاكروا أمرنا, and remind each other of our affairs, وأحيوه, and revive it. Okay, so again, the importance is in being part, an active part of the community. Now, we do have to understand how modernity has impacted communal life. So if you go back, three, 4 centuries ago, 5 centuries ago, even in the West, most people lived in agrarian societies. They lived on the farm, they lived in the towns, they lived in the villages, and they lived there for a long period of time. Generations lived over there. People lived very close to each other. They're very much dependent upon each other as well. And therefore, they were a very tight knit, depending on each other community. That changes with urbanization. And today you find the majority of the world's population lives in urban areas. We live in cities, live in a metropolis, large cities, cities of 1 million, 2 million, more than that as well. Um, and a lot of the urbanization was, of course, caused by industrialization, factories, mass production factories appearing. And wherever the mass production factories appeared, people migrated there looking for work. And they settled around those factories, they settled around those industrial areas. But that represented a very significant shift. In the past, people would not move from one area to another area very easily, and they would move only into familiar, for example, cities, familiar areas. Now people are migrating and moving quite a bit. If you look at our societies today, we move because of work. We will move because of career. We will move because of other opportunities, education opportunities, and we're very quick to move. And when we move, we also easily move into areas we're not familiar with. We move into neighborhoods that we're not familiar with. People can move into a neighborhood, move out of the neighborhood without giving it even a second thought. And so it becomes very common to live in unfamiliar neighborhoods. And then, well, the next change that happened was in the 20th century, in the 30s and the 40s, 1930s, 1940s. General Ford introduces the assembly line. Prior to 30s and 40s, some people were able to afford an automobile. After the 30s and the 40s, a lot more people are able to afford the automobile. And there's a middle that is rising. The middle class is able to afford having their own car. And now more and more people have their own car. Now, as more and more people have their, but they lived, very close to, for example, their school. They lived very close to the grocery. Oh no. Um, has everybody else lost sound as well? Okay. Okay. So only about 10 seconds. Thank you, Sister Fatima, for pointing that out. If we lose sound again, please do let me know right away. So, if you think about it, people living in the 50s, you still live close to your work, you live close to the school, you live close to your grocery, you live close to the mosque. You walk to these places, people live around these places. You see each other at the mosque and the local grocery, you know your grocer. You see your children go to the same school, you go and work in the same place or in the vicinity of the same place. You have a lot more interaction, and you also depend upon each other to a general extent. Living in those areas, you need to go somewhere further away. You borrow each other's cars, you go together to those places. It was very common for people to know each other. Now, some of you who might have lived in those communities, anytime you wanted something, you would go to your neighbor, you would borrow it from them. If they were happy, you would know there's a reason or a cause for happiness there. They were sad, you would know there's a cause for sadness over there. You also knew what was generally happening in each other's lives. There's so many examples like I can share with you for that, but in the interest of time, we're going to move forward on that. But generally, people lived very close to each other. They were involved in each other's lives. They met each other very, very frequently, and they depended upon each other. That's community. Okay. But come the personal automobile, now think about how we live. I mean, we live in places where, we live far away from mosque and work and school and grocery, right? We don't go to the same school, grocery, or areas that our neighbors go to. Our children don't go to the same school. Their children go to one school, we go to another school, for example. And we don't even have to see each other. We just come into the car, we drive out, we come back. Many of us don't even know the names of our neighbors, let alone knowing what is happening in their lives and what is happening in their homes. A person may die in the night. Sometimes nobody knows about it. Until, for example, there is a smell coming from that apartment or from that house. We're just not connected anymore to each other, right? We're not connected to each other's lives. We don't know what's happening. We don't know the struggles that we are going through, and we're not involved in helping each other through those struggles, right? And that has significantly changed our understanding of community. Today when I ask somebody, so what is your community? It's that place I go to on Thursday night. It's that place where when I get married, I'm going to get married over there. Or when I die, that's where they're going to wash me and shroud me, and from there they will take me for the burial. That's not community. You know, Meeting in one place is not community. Kind of seeing each other once a week is not community. Knowing each other by name is not community. And not only have we started to live like that, but now we also think that's what community is. I live my life, I work days, at night I come back to my family. And yeah, I'm part of a community because on Thursday night I go to the center and I know a few people there. And then maybe on the weekend, sometimes we will hang out for a barbecue together. Or, when there's a wedding, I'll go and attend their wedding or something like that. I'm part of a community, and that's not community, right? So, um, firstly, let's look at the misconceptions out there. So a community is not a center, right? Brick and mortar is not a sense of community. Just because there's a big center doesn't mean it's a strong community. Just because there's a small center, it doesn't mean it's a weak community. Living in the West, these are certain realities that we need to understand. When we talk about living in a community in the West, sometimes one of the misconceptions that we have is that it means to be part of a center. That's a part of it, not the entirety of it. A community is not a group of people who meet at the center, right? So my community is not the people whom I see just on Thursday nights, and maybe I have tea with them, or maybe I, rub shoulders with them. That's not community. A community is not a particular number of people either. That we say, okay, if we have, for example, 100 people, then we've got a community. If we go to a mosque on a Thursday night and they have 250 people there, we say that's a strong community. Or if we go to a mosque and they only have 30 people there, we say that's a weak community. In Islam, the weakness of a community has never been gauged by numbers. Look at what Allah says in the Quran. Ibrahim was ummatan wahida, was a whole nation to himself, right? For, community is jama'ah. congregation. Ummah is greater than that. That's like a whole nation. The Prophet used to talk about his ummah as the whole nation. Ibrahim was a nation, right? Community is not gauged by numbers. And the strength of a community is not defined by numbers, by the number of pros or the number of certified. Kind of back to what is a community in Islam, and living in the West where we have to be part of a community. What are we looking a part? What does it mean to be part of a community, especially in modern society and in postmodern society? I think we need to get back to our tradition. How do our traditions define what is the sense of community? Um, share with you the hadith, and I've shared these in some of my lectures. If you followed those lectures, you would have come across these ahadith, but if you haven't, then these are um, very powerful ahadith. They are very powerful ahadith. They force us to revisit our understanding of community, and what kind of communities we need to build in the West. And until we build such communities, our growth will always be a superficial growth. It is not going to be a real growth. It's not going to be something that will help us grow in our iman and grow in our akhlaq, right? So the Prophet spoke about the importance of community significantly. And so he was asked, وَمَا جَمَاعَةِك? And what's a congregation, a community in your ummah and your nation? And the Prophet of Allah says that man kana ala al-haqqi, it is those people who are on the truth, that are committed to the haqq, they are to the truth. وَإِن كَانُوا عَشَرَةً, even if they are 10 in number, in the eyes of the Holy Prophet, that's a strong community. And if they are not committed to the truth, right? Even are 500 in number, that's not a strong community. That's a weak community, right? Now we have to think about the people that we are around. Are we all committed to the truth? Is the truth what brings us together? Do we share our commitment to the truth with each other? Or do we gather for the sake of gathering itself? And of course, there is value even in gathering for the sake of gathering. But that's become far too common today. The comments I hear in every community is, how can we bring people together? How can we have them come together more often? How can we get them to gather together, right? And we hardly ask that, how can we get them committed to the truth when they have a common commitment to the truth? That's when we're going to have a strong community. I mean, haven't you noticed many of our students being asked to get more people coming on Thursday? That seems to drive our mindset. More people, have them coming to the center. Don't you think the question that we should think is, okay, those people who are to the center, how can we keep them committed to the truth? How can we be seeking the greatest? How can we get them to make sacrifices for this? Because when they do that, even if there are 30 people in that center, it's a strong community. And the Prophet is right there, right? Those who are on the truth, وَإِن قَلُّوا, even if they are a few number, the first and the finding after the community is their commitment to the haqq, their commitment to the truth and to justice. Aspect of a community is their commitment to each other, relation to each other. And that relationship in Islam is defined as ukhuwa, as brotherhood. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, the believer, the only brothers, the only real relationship, important relationship you have with each other is the relationship of brotherhood. So we notice that the Prophet of Allah wants to build the first community in Medina once over there. He does a masjid, he does start classes and sessions. Meaning of one of the things that he does is he makes a pact of brotherhood, and that pact of brotherhood is so strong that either they were inheriting from each other or they thought they should inherit from each other as well. That's how strongly they felt towards each other, right? But the brotherhood, it wasn't just about two people are brothers to each other. It wasn't just about having a sense of joint identity or having a sense of joint membership towards a particular cause. Brotherhood is a sense of duty and responsibility and love for each other. When people have that, even if they don't have a center, have a community, right? And even things that we notice in 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 our experiences that we need to reflect upon. The material that I'm sharing with you, maybe it causes us to rethink some of our formulas or rethink some of our previous definitions, but I don't think that it's something very, very new. You might have noticed that sometimes when you have a small center, where people are very close to each other, um, you have a stronger sense of bonding and community. And sometimes you can have a very big and lavish and elaborate center, but because people are no longer close to each other, don't have a strong sense of community, right? Because community is not defined by size of the center. It's not defined by the programs at the center. First and foremost, in the vertical relationship, it is defined by our commitment to Allah and our commitment to the truth. And in the horizontal relationship, it is defined by our sense of duty and commitment towards each other. That's important. Yeah. And we have to be able to be committed towards each other. One day, one of the companions of the sixth Imam, he came to the Imam and he said, what are the rights of my brother upon me, my brother in faith? I'm rephrasing the hadith. And the Imam said to him, I like you, and I don't want to tell you something that you are not going to be able to fulfill. The rights of the brothers upon each other is a very heavy right. And the man said to the Imam that, Inshallah, God will help and God will provide me assistance in doing that. But tell me, what are the rights that we have upon each other? And the Imam said, you have 7 rights in total upon each other. And the Imam explains them one by one. When the community fulfills those rights towards each other, then you've got a strong sense of community. And that's the kind of community that we want to have. That's the kind of community that we want to build, even if they are 10 in number. But if they're doing that for each other, then you have a strong sense of brotherhood and a strong sense of community over there. And that's very, very difficult to do in modern society, because modern society is anti-community. Modern society, postmodern society, very, very individualistic. Consumerism consumes us. Capitalism drives our way of life. And it is all about myself, my needs, my benefits. I mind my own business. You mind your own business. We will be polite to each other. We will be nice to each other. We will tell each other that, when you need help, let me know. But we'll not go out of our way. When somebody asks for help, modern society is not geared towards providing that help. I mean, think about it. Even when we want to help, we would rather prefer that, I'll give you my credit card, you just swipe it, take the donation out of it, and then do leave me alone, right? And modern society has made that very easy. sanitized way of helping. We feel good that we've given some money. But the moment somebody comes and asks me, but I need your time, I need your strength, I need your hands to lift things for me, very, very difficult. But that's community, right? When we're able to do this, when we can spend the time, listen to a person, we can sit down with them, they know we can sit down, they can sit down with us, then we've got a community, right? And do we have that today in our communities? Let's say a stranger walks into the mosque. Let's say a stranger walks into the center. You know, do they have that feeling, or do they not have that feeling of being welcomed? So look what the Quran says. Allah says, Surah Al-Ma'idah, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. In a strong community, support each other in acts of goodness and in acts of piety. This is called being spiritually supportive to each other. Doing amr bil ma'ruf, nahi anil munkar. We have the wilada of Lady Fatima coming up in a few days, in 2 days' time. And I thought that I would share with you a hadith from her that many of you have heard, that Imam al-Hassan narrates that it was a Thursday night and I saw my mother in her mihrab and she was praying the whole night up until the time of Fajr. And, if you pay attention to the verbiage of the hadith, the Imam says she was praying for the neighbors, what to him, and she was mentioning them one by one, naming them and praying for them. So I would assume that her prayer would be in this form, that, oh Allah, so and so neighbor, they are going through this difficulty. Oh Allah, help them in overcoming this difficulty. Now my question is that, how would she know what their difficulties are, what their needs are, what du'as they need, if she was not involved in their lives, if she wasn't talking to them, if she wasn't listening to them, if she wasn't trying to help them, that's a sense of community. And then she did that the whole night, and then the next morning, Imam al-Hassan says, I say to my mother, you prayed for everybody, but you didn't pray for us in the house. And Lady Fatima said, Al-Jar, the neighbor first, ثم الدار, then people of the house. Right? So the important point I want to make over here is that a community is defined by two relationships. First is a vertical relationship. It's commitment to God and it's commitment to the truth. The second is a horizontal relationship. People's commitment to each other, not to programs, not to organizations, not to committees. Those are there. But first and foremost, what is their sense of duty and responsibility towards the rights of each other? When those are strengthened, we have a strong community. When we say that in the West, when we come and live here, we should be part of communities, that's the kind of community we're talking about, because that's the kind of community that helps us in developing our iman and in developing our akhlaq as well. Now, my question for you is, if we change theoretically the way we think about communities along these lines, what are some practical differences that you can see in how we approach community building and how we define community? I'm asking now very much at the ground level, when we are inside our communities, how does that change what we do as a community and how we function within the community? So I've just put up the question, Brother Ali Raza. Um, So one is not going outside comfort zone. Yeah. So I mean, to be able to achieve this, we have to be able to go outside our comfort zone. We have to be always seeking the truth, and be committed to it. And sometimes it's not comfortable, but if we want to have growth, nobody has growth in their comfort zones. We always have growth outside of our comfort zone. Or when you go to the center, you see somebody new. It may not be within our comfort zone to go and introduce ourselves or to speak to them. We sometimes like to sit within our cliques or our groups, but you go outside of your comfort zone and you welcome that person. Thank you for sharing that. Language and traditional way of doing programs like Azadari. So I'm not clear. Are you saying that we need to maintain the traditional ways of doing programs, or do we need to change our language and our traditional ways? Ascent, accommodate and not be rigid. Um, so on one hand, there is value to our languages and to our traditional ways of doing, Azadari. These traditions are for generations, and there is a truth or a reality to them. And it's the traditional ways that have, helped us to pass on the message from generation to generation. But at the same time, we also have to embrace some change as well, right? Our communities now will become more and more diverse communities. They're second, third generation communities. Not all speak the mother tongue. Some now only speak English, for example, or the majority only speak English. If we want to build a strong community and we want everybody to be committed to the truth, then we also have to have programs where everybody is accommodated and together we are growing towards that greater truth. Okay, how else does this change how we function? Ascent. So in the community, it's about the relationship between individuals. We build community one person at a time, one individual at a time. It's no longer about trying to get as many people there as possible, getting as many people joining us as possible. No, if I'm able to have a strong brotherhood with one brother this month or next month, or sisterhood with one sister this month or next month, that's far more profound and powerful than having a superficial relationship with 50 people, right? And our thinking needs to change. Rather than focusing on centers and programs, we need to focus on individuals, on people, on human beings, because community has always been about human beings and their relationship to each other, and more importantly, their collective relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thank you, Brother Ali Reza, for sharing that. Okay. So I'm just going to share about 4 to 5 thoughts right now on how I think that changes the structures of our communities and our centers. And I'll leave it then to you to share your thoughts or to ask any questions because we are nearing the end of our time. So living in the West, communities should have, number one, a strong spiritual guide, a strong alim. That cannot be overemphasized because remember, community is our commitment to the truth. And the truth comes to us through reason and also through revelation. And the local alim is my connection to the revelation, who helps me to understand the revelation, right? Helps me to understand the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. Helps me drive my life and my community towards the teaching of the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. Therefore, the first and most important ingredient in a jama'ah is the Imam of the Jama'ah, right? And every Jama'ah should have an Imam, a strong Imam, a learned Imam. When we're looking to moving towards a community, moving towards a new city, for example, one of the first things we ought to ask is this congregation, do they have, a good, strong spiritual guide who's able to drive and motivate that community and connect them to the haqq? Because that's what the hadith of the Prophet says, man kana ala al-haqqi, those who are on the truth, right? And if we think of it as, for example, the Quran or the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt as being the source, being the fountainhead, being the spring from which that knowledge comes to us, and then it comes to the Maraji of Taqlid, for example, they explain that and goes to the scholars and then they explain it, and therefore, our connection to that particular fountainhead, our connection to the station, to the haqq, the source of the haqq, is through the one who has studied it, the one who has learned it. So, number one, a true Islamic community, not just a Muslim community, has a strong spiritual guide. Two, they should also have strong educational institutions. We want to raise our children with a commitment to the haq, right? To understand that there is a truth and it is our goal to seek out the truth and to conform ourselves to the truth and not this postmodernist idea that we make the truth conform to us. Huh? And that the truth is not limited to that which is the physical world, like in modern approach and modern societies, but the metaphysical world, the way you have in traditional societies, right? Well, to do that, our communities have to build strong madrasas, weekend schools, but I think more and more importantly, to build strong schools, elementary schools and high schools. And when we talk about elementary schools and high schools, again, it's not just about making sure their behavior is an Islamic behavior. No, their view of the world is an Islamic view of the world, right? Because then those people are going to be part of our community in our commitment to the haqq. Three, there should be a culture of learning and seeking the truth in our communities. Education should not cease with madrasa, grade 10 and grade 12. Education should continue. Academies like the Academy for Learning Islam are very, very important institutions. And we should always seek to continue along with our community an understanding of Islam, develop our understanding of Islam through post-madrasa classes, through camps, through retreats, because we all constantly want to be on the same page in search of the truth. That's so important. I was recently lecturing in a community about the use of screen time and how to work with children when it comes to limiting their screen time and making sure that they're watching something that's appropriate. And we had a father there, and he made an observation that I've heard many times. He said that, look, we do all of these things. We from day one made sure our children have good that they know what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. But the problem, he said, is that even though we follow these good principles, the people who are with us, other family members, other community members, they don't do that. And our children notice it. And then our children say, well, Baba, why can he do it and we can't do it? And why can he watch that and we can't watch that? A very simple idea of how to raise our children. And if we are not both committed to the truth, we are not both seeking the same truth, we are not both trying to understand the same truth, well, it becomes different, it becomes difficult even to raise our own children. And that's something very simple. But what about bigger decisions that we need to make? About the community, about the future of the community, about the programs we want to have, about the services that we want to provide. How can we do that if we are not collectively committed to a greater truth? Okay? And that happens by taking post madrasa classes, camps, and retreats. Now, strong religious identity and other identities have to become secondary identities. Other identities, like ethnic identities, like nationalistic identities, these are earthly identities, right? Our religious identity, our faith based identity has to become the primary identity. So that in a community, even if people come who don't share the same nationality that we have, they don't share the same ethnicity that we have, but because they are our brother in faith, we still have a strong sense of connection to them. We still have a strong sense of duty and responsibility towards them. I fear that if we allowed other identities to become more important, that same sense of duty and responsibility is not going to be there. And finally, we have to have strong support services and not just programs, right? It's very easy to run programs, Thursday night programs, Friday programs, Wilada programs, Shahada programs, conferences, seminars. These are programs. But we want to have a growth in the community. We need to have services, right? So that we're supporting each other. Financial services, health services, marriage services, and not only to say that the community, the leadership, the committee, the subcommittee should take care of it. No, first and foremost, in our own hearts, we need to be worried about the financial, the marital, the health, of members of our community. I'll stop over there. It is 7 o'clock right now. Did go a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I will be with you for another 5 to 10 minutes. If you have any questions or any thoughts that you'd like to share with us at this time, more than happy to answer those or to listen to them. But thank you once again for attending both sessions. I pray that the material is beneficial to you and provides you with food for thought. And like I shared my email last week, feel free to email me even after these sessions for any feedback or for any questions. I will end the session right now, but I will be with you, and I'll be more than happy to respond to any questions that you have. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Ali Reza, I did not expound on this in my series of lectures at Yasin. I did speak about it when I was lecturing in Stanmore. If you go and listen to lectures 7, 8, and 9, you will find some of the material in there, and that might be beneficial and useful. As for Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar, when I was lecturing for Arba'in in Minnesota at Anjuman Asghari, I gave 4 to 5 lectures on Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar, and the importance of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar. I think first and foremost, the importance of it has been lost in our community. Imam Ali has a uh, hadith or a short saying in Nahj al-Balagha where he says that if a person cannot do Amr bil Ma'ruf, if a person cannot do Nahi Anil Munkar by his speech or his heart or his hand, for example, with none of those things, then he is a dead person who is living or who is existing amongst the living people. And he says, and how can you compare Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar to all of goodness, no matter what goodness you mention, right? Any act of goodness, put all of it together. It is nothing but the words of Imam Ali, but spit in comparison to an ocean. That's how important Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar is. I think there are two important conversations. The first important conversation is with respect to uh, um, what is the definition of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. And one of the changes I'd like to see in our community is that Amr bil Ma'ruf is not only about telling person to do the right thing. Rather, more importantly, it is to help the person in doing the right thing. Sometimes we have an obstacle in our life that we cannot overcome. And our role coming into this person's life is not to sort of reprimand them that how come you cannot overcome this obstacle, is to actually help them to overcome that obstacle. Sometimes a person has moral problems not because they're a bad person, but because they have psychological problems or they have, knowledge deficiencies. Then we have to help them with that. And the second thing is, how do you do amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, and what's the right approach to take to that? Um, you know, uh, Doing it the right way is just as important as doing it. So we have to learn how to do it in the right way. And sometimes it requires a lot of patience. It requires building trust, building relationships. So that's a very, very broad topic, of course. But those are the main questions that we need to look at over there. Yes, Brother Liraza, I did speak about building community in modern society for one of the Muharrams over there, but I was more so looking at other aspects of community. How do we become tolerant? How do we become united? How do we, for example, integrate women into our community in an Islamic way? So that was more so about the attributes of a community in modern society. But this is now at the core of what is a community. Finally, going to Brother Mazahir's question about how come we have law and how come we have, for example, police and these structures in place in postmodern societies. If postmodern societies is opposed to authority and it is opposed to it's anti-realism. So one thing by the Mazahir you will have noticed is that in modern and postmodern societies, um, we have become, number one, very, very secular. So gone is the idea that, the government or the law is supposed to help you towards a greater truth, towards better values, towards moral and spiritual growth, which is what, an Islamic structure is supposed to do. We're very much secular societies. Governments do not get involved in building spirituality or building values. That's not the role of government. Governments only are now supposed to ensure that we do not take away each other's opportunities, freedoms, and rights, and that each of us should be able to experience life in the way that we think is correct. So you can already see that kind of thinking coming into our societies in the form of secularism. But you'll also notice that in postmodern societies, that secularism has gone even a step further, where there were certain things that even in modern societies we say, no, a human being doesn't have the autonomy to do that because we think that's harmful for him, and so he shouldn't be doing that. One example would be marijuana, for example. A human being shouldn't be smoking that. That's harmful for him. But now in postmodern societies, in fact, I was listening to the news today here in Vancouver, and they have a heroin club who is arguing that just as marijuana has become legal, that there should be avenues where heroin also becomes legal for heroin users. Now they have an argument for it, and I don't wish to go into that argument. Maybe there's some, a little bit of argument to what they're trying to say. But let human beings then make their own decisions. Um, or for example, another area where you notice is where we have kind of given people complete or more autonomy than before, would be in the issue of medical assistance in death. And when it comes to euthanasia, because here we're saying that a person should live in a way that's authentic to them. They should make decisions for themselves. And if they feel that they do not wish to continue with life, then they should be able to end their lives, and others should be able to assist them in ending their lives if that's more authentic to them. So you'll notice these small changes within the laws that are more and more reflecting postmodern thought. Okay. Well, then we'll end with that, inshallah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to that which we do not know, and to give us the strength and tawfiq to do that which we know. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us in developing our iman and developing our akhlaq. And we pray that He gives us the tawfiq to create communities that are one day going to become the communities of the 12th Imam, and that our missions are in line with the mission of the 12th Imam. آمين رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.